You step outside for a morning coffee and the pavement under your feet shudders like a sleeping animal waking up. And then, where yesterday there was just cracked asphalt and a tuft of weeds, a fissure yawns open and something enormous stares back. A rim of wet, iridescent skin, a pupil the size of a car, an eye that blinks with deliberate curiosity. At first your brain scrambles for analogies. Sinkholes, oil wells, or some grotesque art installation. But as the soil parts in neighborhoods across the globe, the pattern is undeniable. The earth itself is unveiling eyes, countless, slow-opening, black and glassy, watching inhumanly calm. Imagine the sound. Not a roar but a hush, like 1,000 aquarium tanks being opened, the gentle slosh of subterranean fluids and the soft click of lids sliding back. And imagine the sight. Suburban lawns cleaved by oval apertures, rural fields dotted with glossy orbs reflecting sky and clouds, city plazas where asphalt peels away to reveal concentric irises that track your movement with patient, unsettling precision. Scientists would flood in, of course, seismologists, geologists, xenobiologists, forming a human ring of hypotheses. Some would point to previously unknown mantle anomalies, pockets of silica forming biocrystalline structures. Others would suggest a mass of chemosynthetic organisms that colonize subterranean aquifers, evolving eyes to process a sudden influx of light from tectonic stress. A braver few would whisper of an intelligence grown over eons beneath our feet, eyes as a late adaptation to monitor a surface world it has watched for millennia. Social reaction would be immediate and strange. At first fear, then a fascinated ritual. People would gather at the fissures with cameras and binoculars, treating these openings like a new kind of national monument. Artists would project films onto irises. Lovers would meet where two eyes aligned like twin moons. Governments would cordon off zones and scientists would set up observation rigs. But the eyes don't respond to fences or warnings. They merely look. That gaze would change how we move through the world. Streets become catwalks of avoidance. Children learn to read not just faces but apertures in the ground, teaching each other which eyes are slow and indifferent and which seem to linger, as if concentrating on particular thoughts. Religions and myth-makers would rush to interpret. Prophets who once spoke of the watchful earth would suddenly find scripture in vogue, while others would recast the phenomenon as an omen, a judgment, or a test. Economies would spin on a new axis. Real estate near fissures might become cursed or consecrated, depending on whether the market decides the eyes bring luck or ruin. Scientists would be forced into uncomfortable humility as old models fail to predict the behavior of eyes that dilate in response to language, that recoil from certain frequencies of sound, or that follow certain individuals more closely than others. Imagine the experiments. Linguists trying to sing to an iris, neurologists measuring microsaccades, ecologists testing whether plant roots redirect toward or away from the orbs. The eyes would behave like a new sense organ for the planet, and with that, ethical dilemmas would arise. If the Earth is watching, does it have intentions? If an eye recoils when you step too close, is that aversion? If it lingers when someone cries above it, is that empathy? The human mind loves patterns, and soon folklore would bloom. Stories of eyes that weep dew at dawn, of orbs that wink at lovers, of fissures that open a centimeter wider to let a rescued kitten slip into the dark and be reborn as something else. But beneath the poetry, darker possibilities would loom. What if these eyes are surveillance in a literal sense? Not passive but part of a planetary nervous system that has begun to synchronize. What if, as more eyes came online, they coordinated subtle movements, lenses focusing sunlight into narrow bands, causing crops to wilt in patterns, irises aligning to form symbols visible from the air, a slow choreography that reshapes landscapes without human consent. Imagine, too, the psychological burden. To live under a sky of eyes is to be perpetually observed by something older and stranger than any camera. The comforting illusion of privacy would crumble. Even your thoughts feel smaller when met with a patient, unblinking stare from below. Mental health crises would spike as people develop new phobias and rituals. Some would sleep with shoes on, convinced the gaze chooses those whose routines betray weakness. Others would find solace in the eyes, interpreting their silence as judgment withheld as a kind of tough love. International dynamics would scramble. Nations would compete for control of the most responsive fissures. Scientists would argue over open collaboration versus containment, and militaries would test whether the eyes could be weaponized, whether a precisely focused sound would make an iris constrict, whether coordinated signals could prod the subterranean network into revealing its structure. But the eyes, if they are a network, might also teach us things we cannot yet comprehend. Perhaps they sense chemical signatures we miss, tracking migration patterns through the subtle shifts in soil scent. Perhaps they correlate with seismic precursors, blinking more rapidly before a quake and offering in their odd, nonverbal way, new data on the planet's inner life. Human ingenuity would pivot. Engineers might design instruments modeled on iris mechanics. Architects could learn patterns of subsoil behavior to build in harmony with the watching ground. And then, in a single cinematic moment, someone would notice that the eyes are changing in another way, not just watching but showing. Over time, some irises would begin to reflect more than the present. Layered images flickering across their surfaces like film frames, glimpses of places they've observed for centuries, of species long extinct from the surface, of tidal patterns before our records began. We would watch history reflected back at us from the planet's own pupils, and with that revelation would come humility and a strange intimacy. The ultimate twist would be quiet and humane. Amid all theories and fears, a child would crawl to a seam in the earth, press a palm to the rim of an eye and feel warmth. The eye would blink, and in that blink the child would feel seen not as prey but as kin. And across the world people would suddenly imagine talking with the planet instead of talking at it. Whether the watching eyes become friends, overlords, or mirrors of our own loneliness would remain an open question, but one thing would change forever. Humans would understand at the base of their bones that the ground beneath them is not inert. Somewhere below the cobblestones and the compost, there is awareness, patient, vast, and enigmatic. And for the first time in history, it has decided to look up.